My guest today is Daniel Poulin. He's the former Director of Wellbeing for Accor Hotels and led the company's diversity and inclusion planning. Unfortunately, like so many in hospitality, the pandemic caused him to be laid off, but he's still deeply entrenched in the space. We're diving into diversity, inclusion, and well-being on this episode. These are topics that are getting much more discussion in the hospitality space, and as we look to reopen the industry after the pandemic, there's no better time to be talking about how we want this to look going forward. When initially talking with Daniel about being on the show, I learned that diversity, inclusion, and well-being are all related topics that each need to be part of any organization's efforts in their overall D&I goals. Daniel shares insights on his efforts within Accor on their D&I actions, where individuals can start in their own efforts about education and actions, and where he sees the office of the future taking shape. It was a fascinating discussion that could have gone on for hours, but I think in this first episode, we touch on several important points and have established a good foundation for future episodes. So let's get to it. This is episode 43 of the Proven Principles podcast, Daniel Poulin on diversity, inclusivity, and well-being in hospitality. Enjoy. Daniel, it's so great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for making me work on my grooming a little bit more than usual.
You're looking sharp. You got the pocket square. And I know, I love it.
It's nice to be out of your track pants, for a while. So thanks for that.
You bet. And it's good to reconnect with you too. Just for the audience edification, we did work together for a short amount of time at Fairmont, but it feels like a lifetime ago. That was back when I was at DC about 6 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? What's your background? What's your connection to hospitality? What have you been up to?
Okay, great. I just finished being the head of well-being for the North and Central America region for Accor. Accor, I think most people on the podcast probably know that brand, but we run brands like Fairmont, Sofitel, Novotel, Raffles, etc. So I was based out of Toronto, running the well-being for the region. I recently, due to COVID, lost my job. I was also one of the key players in starting diversity and inclusion at the corporate office and the region. So this is something that 2 years ago didn't exist at Accor, and now happy to say that it does exist, and it is actually making some great progress, I'm sure. Beside this, I come from hospitality, but I also come from a different kind of background. I'm French Canadian, as you can hear from my accent. Mm-hmm. I work in other parts of the world. I work in China for a couple of years for Kempinski. I work in Beirut, Lebanon for Intercon and for Movenpick. I used to own my own business. I had a Chinese furniture store for 12 years in Vancouver. And I work also a lot in fitness. So my background is really fitness and spas. And I used to run a community center here in Vancouver many years ago. So that's a bit about me.
That's amazing. Pretty diverse background.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. I want to talk with you today. The reason that we got connected was to talk about diversity and inclusion and well-being in hospitality. And mm-hmm. This is something we've been hearing at large more and more about pre-pandemic. I don't know. Maybe you can let us know whether the pandemic has derailed any efforts that may have been going on, just because people's focus maybe moves towards other things like keeping their business alive. But the whole diversity, inclusivity, and the well-being part of hospitality and how we come out of this pandemic, making sure that people, that there's a culture of taking care of yourself mm-hmm. and being able to recharge your batteries and bring your best every day, but knowing that it's okay to take time off and having it be okay in the organization, that when people need time off, that they can get it. Right. So, it could be some deep waters to swim through today, but I think it's a topic that I'm excited to dive into a little bit more and even just educate myself on it. I think this is good to have you on to talk about.
Thanks, Adam. And you know what? You're completely right. It's a topic that often people feel like they're putting their foot in their mouth, and I may actually do it during this podcast, so I apologize for this, but it's something that it's a topic that touches everybody, and it's uncomfortable. It brings uncomfortable conversation, uncomfortable emotions, and we make mistakes because it is new for many of us, and even for myself, who's been in the D&I space for a couple of years. It is very new. So maybe what I can start with is maybe to explain about diversity, inclusion, and well-being, because there is a connection between those three. And I think that the main connection is basically all three have the same goal, is to have optimal performance of the workforce. So basically, when we think about bringing our whole self to work, what does that really mean? And we'll probably touch on that a little bit later. But so it's important to start with basically differentiating the three as well. So although they have a common goal, diversity is really something that is measurable. It's often we say that diversity is a fact. It is basically a visible, usually visible, more or less. You can look at your workforce and see who on your team represents the minorities that we try to have represent in a diverse workforce. So that's really diversity. So it is a fact. When we think about inclusion, this is when things get a lot more complicated, because we're talking about workplace culture, we're talking about unperceptible ways of bringing people together, and inclusion is really the most difficult part to achieve when we talk about D&I. So we often refer to inclusion as more of an act. So if diversity is a fact, inclusion is more of an act. That means that you are going to have to change your practice and your work culture in order to make people feel included in your work, right? So well-being is basically also connected in a way, because when you want people to bring their whole self to work and their best self to work by providing them with tools that improves their well-being and having a D&I culture at the same time, all three of them could hopefully have the opportunities to really bring the best out of the workforce that you are dealing with. So another way of simplifying all of this, and it's a quote that I love from Verna Myers, and she said, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And if you are a leader listening to this podcast, I think it's very nice if you've got the party going, you've got a nice diverse culture working for you, just try to see if there's anybody dancing at your party, because, we want to have a good party. We want to make sure that people are having a good time at our party. But that's where the tricky part is if nobody's dancing, you're really not going anywhere fast.
Wow. I love that. That paints such a great picture that illustrates kind of where efforts probably need to go. And you make a great point. I mean, even if your diversity, would you call it diversity action planning, or kind of what your end goal is there? Even if you've achieved that to whatever metric people are trying to figure out what is the right metric to go by. The inclusivity piece feels like it's more about, okay, great. So how do you now get this, like make this sticky?
Yeah.
For lack of a better way of terming it. Where's the piece in here? And I guess me fumbling over a question is probably a good way to even get to the point where, why is this such an uncomfortable space for people to talk about? Where's that I don't want to call it a disconnect, but there's this hurdle that's hard to get over for a lot of people in having this conversation from the start. What do you think drives that?
I think people are maybe afraid to, again, make a mistake when they try to be inclusive. I think that it's something that almost, when we think about being politically correct, everybody has their qualms about this, and they don't want to offend anyone, but they also want to go to a space, and it's a space sometimes that they want to enter where they actually don't know much, right? So if my circle of friends is mostly people that looked and act like me, chances are that when I'm running a team that actually doesn't look and act like myself, it puts me in a situation where I'm not quite sure how to approach this to make sure that everybody is really performing at their optimal level. So there's an education part that is very important, I think, when we think about diversity and inclusion, but it is also a scary part. The good news is that there's professionals in D&I that work out there, and some companies have been doing diversity and inclusion for years. So in hospitality, from what I have seen and when I've had conversation with people, we're a little bit behind. I think that our heart is in the right place. I think that everybody would agree that the hospitality industry is usually very welcoming to a lot of the minorities, but we don't really have systems in place. It's kind of as I said, the heart is at the right place. We are welcoming, but it is not done in a systematic point of view at corporate level or even at a hotel level, where you really have programs in place that make sure that this is going to be producing the results that you want.
So how did you start with Accor? What was the genesis of the efforts that you were working on, and kind of what path did you end up going down with it?
Well, that's great, Adams. You know, I being the head of spa and fitness, what happened is that about 3 years ago now, one of our spa received a call from a woman who's trans, and basically informed the spa that she was going to receive a spa treatment. This was almost 2 months before her appointment, and she just wanted us to know that she is a trans woman coming to receive a spa treatment, and to make sure that we were going to be able to offer the kind of experience that she would expect us to offer. So my spa director called me, and we had a conversation. I said, this is very interesting. Do we have any SOPs related to trans because, you know, when you work in spa and fitness, compared to the hotel, you have the locker room situation. You have a place where people are wearing different levels of undress. You know, you're looking after pool, you're looking after locker rooms, and then in D&I related to trans, the way to approach this is basically that the person should be allowed to use the locker room that they identify themselves with. The problem that may arise is that being trans doesn't mean that you have gone to surgery. It has nothing to do with getting a surgery. It is possible that after a certain time in a certain locker room, the person does not end up looking as much as the gender of the locker room where that person is, right? So anyway, so I realized that we didn't have SOPs. I realized that we didn't have best practices. So her and we started working on it, and then we created something where she was going to be offered, obviously, to change wherever she would like to change. And also we were going to offer her the use of a treatment room if she felt more comfortable changing in the privacy of a treatment room that had a shower and all that, right? So I thought that was great, and to end that story, it ended up on a very positive note. The guests came, they did an amazing job at the hotel, and she actually wrote back to see how amazing she felt, and everything was great, right? So there's a happy story there, but she gave us 2 months notice. And that's not always going to be the case, right? So now it made me think about, okay, maybe we need to be a bit more proactive and have some system in place. And I reached out to our talent and culture, because somehow D&I falls under talent and culture, although it doesn't mean it should be there, but in most places it does. And then we started working on creating a few more, not creating, but inviting a few more people to participate in this D&I culture that we were trying to accomplish, right? And about a year later, we were finally able to launch a D&I committee made of lay people. And basically that's how it started at Accor, and it is still happening now. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but it is how it started.
Wow, all because of a spa treatment. I mean, that's right. I mean, how often does that even happen in hotels? I mean, just with a guest will kind of throw something at you that you hadn't really thought about before, and it's nobody's fault. You haven't been faced with it, and now you got to think about it, figure out how to deal with it. And that's a big one. Wow. I'm sure there's probably people listening right now going like, man, we haven't had a trans person try to book a spa treatment, but we better have an SOP in place to deal with it.
Yeah, and many other, I mean, there's been countless situations after that happened. We had situation where there was a couple of gay men in a hot tub in one of the hotel. It's a hot tub that is located on the pool deck, and that means that it is accessible to anyone. Everybody's obviously wearing the proper attire. And there was basically a young kid that was basically jumping in and out of the hot tub while this couple was trying to relax, right? And then when the couple asked the kid if he could please just, respect then the father got involved, and then it became a situation where the father used words against the two men that were not acceptable. And then of course somebody from the hotel came, and then we realized that, so what do we do? What is that employee who's coming to handle this kind of situation has the tool and the training to address a situation that, as you can imagine, when it goes to social media afterwards, can become very complicated, right? And if we don't have the training and the tool and the know-how, it becomes a problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've got so many questions for you on this. The first one that comes to mind, though, is having been somebody who has to train SOPs, like develop and train and implement SOPs. There's always somebody on the team who disagrees with the way that practice is getting rolled out for whatever. There's always a reason why it's not going to work, right? But it's one thing when you're talking about how many rings you have to answer the phone, and it's a whole other thing talking about something that's very sensitive. And you've got, I imagine, other cultural and personal thoughts around this, and that colors people's way of kind of interacting with the world in this subject that we're talking about. If you were in a position to have to roll something like this out at a hotel, how do you start creating a conversation internally where people who may be reluctant to buy into a lot of the things that we're talking about today start to look at things in a bit of a different way?
That's very important, Adam, because I asked that question when I was entering that space, and basically what I was told by the people who have been in that D&I space for many, many years, one of the advice is always start with your employees. I gave you two examples now that were really about a guest interaction and how this started with us at Accor, but I think that you need to first address the employee situation regarding diversity and inclusion. So if you have a diverse workforce, that means you have people coming from different lived experiences that they are hopefully being able to bring this to work by being their whole self. Then you need to think about this. So do you have if we continue with the trans part, which is really a small part of D&I, do you have a trans employee? Chances are you probably don't, right? Mm-hmm. But if you were to have a trans employee or non-binary employee coming to work for you, would that person be welcome? Would we have a uniform for them? Would we have gender neutral pronouns, gender neutral conversation? So all of those things. So you need to start thinking about the inclusion of employees before you start doing things for the guests. However, these may happen at the same time, right? Like the example that I gave, we had situation with guests that we had to address. Now, the logic part would be that the SOPs and the training that relates to that guest interaction is being transferred internally to the leaders that are able to talk about this, right? So it's, but really you need to start with the employees. I think it's...
Yeah. No, I like that. The question that comes to mind is, and forgive me if I don't ask it properly or in a good way, but it's how do you measure an organization's diversity effectiveness or diversity? Maybe that's not even the right way to ask it. How do you measure what's the goal you try to set, and how do you measure against it?
Mm-hmm. Well, when it comes to diversity, I mean, obviously, whenever I think most of us have our engagement survey on a yearly basis. We're trying to, assess the employees' satisfaction with their work. So there could be some questions in there where we ask the employees to self-identify. So whether they do it or not is another story, but you need some sort of data. So let me give you an example. So in 2020, we had Black Lives Matters. Right, it was a very strong moment for the industry, where we had manifestations happening, especially in the U.S., all over the place, and then companies all over the U.S. and Canada have started making statements about how they would like to change their practice and their diversity in order to have more people from the BIPOC community. BIPOC is the Black or Indigenous and people of color, basically, right? Mm-hmm. So then one of the tendency may be to say, okay, well, we want to have 30% of our managers and above being people from that community by 2025, right? But then if you don't know where you're starting, it's kind of tricky, because now what if you're at 5% right now of BIPOC? And you want to bring it to 30% in 3 years? It may not be realistic, because if your turnover is not as quick as this, there's no way you're going to be able to replace, but all the white faces by people who are representative of other race, right? So So I think asking people to self-identify in some of those questionnaires is a very good way to start assessing what is the diversity of your workforce.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And your point about getting into management and leadership positions, because if you walk in, I mean, the hotels I worked at are incredibly diverse. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Thinking back, though, that was primarily in line level positions.
That's right.
Right. And then
Often
you
the
get
case.
into leadership positions and it becomes a little less so.
Mm-hmm. Same with women in position of leadership. I mean, it is very common in the hospitality industry that
Mm-hmm.
the people at the head of the corporation or at the head of a hotel are mostly white men,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Right.
this is when the uncomfortable conversation need to happen. And this is when we as an industry have to look at this with different eyes and put system in place that is going to ensure that this is not going to continue.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And I have a few ways of doing this. I mean, one of the way, this is maybe for entry level, but one of the tip on increasing your diversity is try to remove the name from a resume. It's very simple, but if you see the name on a resume, obviously, depending on if the name is very genderized, you may
Mm-hmm.
know if it's a man or a woman, but sometimes it may also tell you a bit more about the ethnic background of a person if the name reflects that, right?
Right. Right.
So, there's I think I heard somewhere that there's an orchestra in the US that actually does blind auditions right now, where the player is actually behind a partition. So the person who is selecting the person to play the flute or whatever it is does not see who is actually playing the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit similar to this. So can we, whenever it's possible, remove the name from a resume and try to see if really you're able to give it to the person who, without any bias, because we have unconscious
Yeah.
bias, right?
Right. Right.
And maybe one of the main thing as well is your recruitment team maybe often goes to the same place to recruit, and maybe it's a university, a college, or professional school that unfortunately is not very diverse. So if the
Mm-hmm.
school where you get most of your people is not diverse, chances are that we won't get much of that later on, right? So you need to maybe
Right.
go and knock on somebody else's door to bring diversity into your environment, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
You bring up a great point about unconscious bias. And was this a part of the discussion that you were in with Accor and in the D&I plans of how to address that? Because I imagine that's another really big hurdle to get past.
yeah. Oh, it certainly is. And you know what? The tendency for many organizations that do not have a D&I strategy
Mm-hmm.
and do not have a person who is knowledgeable about D&I working for this company. So basically, they're working only with committees of people who are very passionate about D&I. One of the tendency is to do bias training.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I've read and what I've heard, and for people who have been in the industry, it is really not the place where we need to start. Because
Mm-hmm.
what happens is that basically we are trying to train, again, the most likely white male of the company about not having bias from the people who are the minority. And it doesn't come across as being very nice, because they kind of rebel sometime against this kind of training as something that whether they feel they don't need or they're not comfortable with it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not the first place to start. And I'm not saying that I know where the first place to start is, but we all have unconscious bias, and then we need to find ways to eliminate those as
Mm-hmm.
much as we can. And what I was saying earlier is that I think that is very important to have somebody in your organization that actually knows about D&I from an education point of view and from a lived experience point of view, and can guide your strategy. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're working for a corporation in hospitality, having a paid position that looks after D&I
Mm-hmm.
is key, in my opinion, on how we can move forward.
Should that person just do that, or should it be, an additional job function of somebody who already, I think you mentioned earlier, usually falls under talent and culture or human resources. Should that be a director of HR that does that, or should that be a specific person who just looks after company efforts on D&I?
So I think at a hotel level, I think it will not be possible for a while to have a dedicated person that only looks after D&I, right? I think at a corporate level, definitely. it should be a person that only does that. Whether that person reports to the talent and culture or not, that's a bit debatable, but definitely somebody who has this as their main point of focus. So let me give you an example of what happens. So when hotels or corporate office wants to start D&I, they're basically looking at their workforce and they're going to knock or tap on somebody's shoulder that fits one of the minority group that they want to hear from, right? So you're going to have the Black employee, the brown one, you're going to have the gay, and so on and so on, that are being tapped on the shoulder and say, you know what, we need you to help us do our D&I, develop D&I for our company. Well, it's all very nice. The problem is that although as a gay man, for example, I may have a lived experience that I'm happy to share, I am also not necessarily an expert in diversity and inclusion on the broader scope. Same with the person who is Black, the person who is brown, and so on and so forth, right? So although you have lived experiences that are crucial when we talk about D&I to include in a D&I structure, it does not mean that from the corner of my desk, I'm able to do the changes that is expected from an organization as large as we had, for example, at Accor, right? So, and the danger with this is that, as you can imagine, when you are starting to rock the boat, because obviously if you are bringing D&I to the surface, it's because you feel the need to create some changes in your culture. And so that means that you are asking those people to rock the boat a little bit, but they're not in a position of power to rock that boat because it is not their job. And that's the danger, because then what could happen to those people is that they may be skipped on promotion because nobody likes a boat rocker, right? Nobody likes people to. So if you're not able to say what you feel should be happening in D&I because you've been tasked to do this, because this is not actually your role, chances are that you may end up being skipped on promotion and even worse, right? So
right, which is actually the next thing to jump into is the I part, the inclusivity part, and to your words earlier, being asked to dance.
Yeah.
What are the efforts that you this is the crux of the question. Okay, so if you feel like you've covered the D part, not you personally, but the organization, how do you start going after the I part?
It's very tough, Adam. I mean, it is very difficult because I think that it requires time and it requires the willingness to change. So let me give you an example about myself. So I am passionate about D&I. As I said earlier, as a gay man, I have lived experience that makes me who I am today. I grew up in a small town in Sherbrooke, Quebec, and in the 1980s, being a gay kid was not something that was easy, right? So the bullying and all of this made me who I am today, and I was able to basically absorb all of those lived experiences and now hopefully help me bring this to the surface when I'm talking about D&I. But I don't know much about the other LGBTQ letters because I'm only the G. There's many other letters, and there's a plus. There's a plus at the end. So there's a lot more out there. So what do I do? Well, I educate myself. So I'm a huge fan of podcasts. And that's why I'm glad we are on one now. But basically, when I walk my dogs every day for an hour and a half, I listen to podcasts on diversity and inclusion because I need to understand better what it means and how it fits in workforce, but also how it fits in my life as an individual, right? And now I feel like I've lost your question.
No. It's. I mean, your answer is fantastic. The question was just how do you move towards making sure people feel like they're getting asked to dance?
Yeah. So I'll give you a very simple example, and maybe if you are watching this on YouTube, you will see that under next to my name I have he, him. So those are pronouns. So this is a very simple example of how anybody can tell the world that they are inclusive of people who are non-binary or trans. So as a gay man, I identify still with he and him. but it is not the case. No, gender is no more male and female. There's a whole continuum. And basically by putting this on your email signature, putting this on your Zoom call, and is already a start to show the people who are non-binary or trans that you are inclusive of that group. However, before you start putting he, him, she, her, they, them to your noun, your name, I think it's important that you start educating yourself as well about what is non-binary and trans, because then it becomes kind of weird if you're putting those pronouns after your name, but you have no idea that there's multiple gender and gender expression. So I think you need to be a bit more aware of this. And then when you put those there, then you are able to have a conversation with somebody that may knock on your door one day and say, hello, I'm Joni. I use they and them as pronoun, and I'm very happy that I get to work with you in your hotel. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. That's good advice. It's a good place to start, even for people just in general, if they just don't know where to go, where to turn. It sounds like that's a good place to at least start educating yourself and getting involved in the conversation, even on a personal level. That's
right.
Yeah. I want to switch a little bit here to talk a little bit about something that I'm personally very passionate about. I know you are too, is well-being and how people take care of themselves personally so you can show up to be the best you can be every day. And I mean, you and I really got connected initially as I mentioned at the start, in DC. We opened a pretty incredible gym at that hotel that I think was at the time still probably pretty cutting edge, but at the time, this is 6-7 years ago, very cutting edge. We literally went out and found a partner to help us get a CrossFit affiliate in the gym and grew this pretty impressive fitness culture, not just around the hotel in the neighborhood, but like within the hotel, where we allowed workers to go down and work out during their lunch break. And we changed the food in the cafeteria to be far more healthy and got rid of the, probably to some people's unhappiness, the frozen yogurt machine and all that. But it literally changed the fabric and feeling in that hotel, the focus that we took onto well-being. And it's a train that I've been on just about my entire life. But I know, and I've personally experienced some struggles with this, with the culture within hospitality, the work culture, this 24/7, always on, first one in, last one out of the office. You don't really, sure, you got all this vacation, but it's hard to use because whenever you want to use it, everybody's at the hotel because, it's special occasions and whatnot. But that pace, that redlining every day you can't sustain that forever. And something will break at some point, whether it's a personal relationship, whether it's your health, whether you get burned out, whatever it is. And so, what I'm hoping is that as we come out of this pandemic, people's attention to how they take care of themselves and still be able to bring their best every day moves up in the acceptable subjects of conversation in the organization, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yes.
So as part of the D&I discussion, how does well-being fit into that? And, what I've just been talking about, the soapbox I'm standing on, was that a part of the discussion at Accor that you were working on with D&I?
Oh, Adam, you touch on so many great things, and let me start with something that I feel we all witnessed when the pandemic hit us almost a year ago, right? So I think that many of the people who are listening to this podcast or who are leading teams, many have gone out of their way almost to say that the most important, the priority at the moment is the well-being of our employees. You've heard that, right? You've read
Absolutely.
that.
For years.
We all heard it. So when you work in the wellness space for 30 years, like I have and other people in that space, for us, wellness and well-being is second nature. It's something that you do every day personally, but it's something that is in your life. We often say that the pandemic has speed up a lot of the world problem. And I love hearing that people put the priority of the well-being of their employees as the priority during a pandemic. But it's also something that should be a priority at any given time. And if you are reacting to a pandemic where you realize that there's no system, no programs, no facilities in place to look after the well-being of your employees, then what have you done in the last year to show that actually the well-being of your employee is a priority, right? And that sometimes is the thing. So it doesn't mean just going to the gym, eating well. There's a lot more that comes to well-being. And similar to D&I, there are professionals out there that work in the well-being space who have years of experience and should be the ones who are consulted when it comes down to bringing well-being to your company, right? One of the issues we had in hospitality is that, when the money is not coming in, something's got to give. And some of the first people who were let go in different hotels and chains are often the expert in well-being, which is somewhat strange because now you're facing a health and wellness and well-being crisis, and your experts are gone and it's our fault. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's our fault because we were looking mostly at the well-being of our guests and not the well-being of our internal guests, because it was not part of most of us job description. And we also didn't have the time to do this. So then if there's no more guests or very few guests, it's normal that many of us have lost their job. The thing that could have happened is that maybe we could have pivoted or be encouraged to pivot and then look after the well-being of the employees, which is something that is very difficult at this time for everyone, but we didn't get there. So
yeah, hopefully the discussion picks up again and some of the actions around, it's not just words.
No.
Hopefully the actions. So when you're talking about well-being, and to your point, it's more than just exercising and eating well. What are some of the things that people should be thinking about? And yes, personally, where you take ownership of your own situation, but sometimes you work in a place that just this is the furthest thing from front of mind for the boss. Yeah. Again, you got a similar question again. Where do you start, and what are some things that either people should be looking at for themselves or for managers that should be looking at to pay more than just lip service to, we take the well-being of our employees very seriously?
That's right. And Adam, I think that one of the first things to look at is basically the financial well-being of your workforce. So one of the biggest stressor for anyone, whether it's in a pandemic or not a pandemic, is your ability to sustain a minimal level of living with the salary that you are making at work. So if we are not paying the workforce a living wage, so to speak, it becomes the main stressor and the main the item that has the most impact on their well-being. So this is one thing, but obviously this is a little bit more of a greater conversation. Then what happened, I think there's something about, we talk about mental well-being. Mental health is huge at the moment. Everybody is stressed. We are all isolated. Isolation is one of the worst things that can happen to humans. We are not meant to be isolated. This is going to have consequences, not just today, but for years to come, for our children, for the people like us who are not seeing anyone. We're losing our social skills. We don't have Zoom calls are one thing, but it's not the same as in-person calls, right? In-person meeting, right? So obviously exercise, sleep is huge, and rest. I mean, you talked earlier about the culture of busy, and I think that the hospitality industry is one of the worst because of the nature of the work. It's a 24-hour operation, and we are busy. But the problem is that when the only good answer to the question, "Oh, hey, how are you?" is busy, it becomes a problem. If anything else, like, "Oh, I'm doing great," or "I'm so happy," or I feel in control, it's not really what you want to hear, because this is not how people judge you on being worthy of a promotion.
Right.
Except if you say, "I'm so busy," then it becomes a problem, right? So John Fitch and Max Frizzell have written a book that is called Time Off. And in the Time Off book, they talk about work ethic versus rest ethic. And what happened is that I think we always know what work ethic is, but why don't don't more of us have also a rest ethic, right? They compare basically work as inhaling and rest as exhaling. Mm-hmm. And what happened is that if you keep on inhaling all the time and you don't exhale, something's going to happen.
Yeah. Right.
And that is not something to look forward to. So this all has to shift tremendously. And this is the crisis, I think, is forcing us to reassess exactly that. And the culture of busy has to give room to the culture of rest.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And, you know, I hope that with all the discussion going on around this topic right now, you just have to spend a little bit of time on LinkedIn, or I'm pretty active on Clubhouse now. And there's a lot of hospitality rooms that talk about this kind of stuff, which is great. Just hope that it translates into action because I see the other side of the coin, right? And as do you, I know, where if guests aren't starting to come back in any meaningful way for a long time, it's going to take a long time for staffing to get back to normal, which means fewer people doing more things on property. And talk about hotels specifically. And you could see a situation where you run for many, many months, maybe into years, with maintaining minimal staffing and only very slowly adding an additional body when like you finally hit that consistent threshold of occupancy where you can support it, because you're not going to add more bodies on when you're still in these peaks and valleys, right?
That's right.
So it's something that has to be taken seriously, and the cost of it, I think, really should be looked at a cost of doing business, not as an amenity to be given and then taken away.
Adam, one of the way of looking at busy is that basically you're somebody else owns your time, and you don't own your time. Your family, your loved one, they don't own your time anymore. And basically, to give your time to a company that actually is almost taking all of it is not sustainable. It's not something that at the end of your life, you're going to feel like, oh my God, I had such a great life of excessive work, right? Mm-hmm. And who did I leave behind? So who owns your time is basically the question. And why don't you own your own time?
Mm-hmm. I imagine there's a lot of people right now that look back on all of the time and energy and dedication and missed personal events in the name of work, the name of hotel and hospitality work, that were laid off when this pandemic happened, or halfway through, or even just in the last few weeks, even though we're almost a year into it, that are thinking to themselves, well, first they're hurt because of it, but when you get past that, you're like, what did I do that for? What was the point in over dedicating myself to something that I thought was stable and I thought was still going to be there, and played the game and did all the things that were asked of me, and this is where I am right now.
Yeah.
It was all for nothing.
Yeah. No, it's, I think that this time working from home has brought people back to what actually other important things in their life are. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we go back to the new normal, we are going to be in for a really big awakening of a change that needs to happen, because I am hoping that the people are going to demand a greater work-life balance, work-life integration than what they had in the past. I suspect that most people are not going to want to go back to the office 5 days a week and so on. Obviously, if you're an hotel operator, your job is in the hotel, and this is a different story. But if for other industry out there, I think there will be a hybrid model that is coming up, where the work from home and the work from the office is actually intertwined in order to offer people greater work-life integration.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that has to come with people demanding it? Or is that something that organizations are going to change on their own? Where does it come? Is it bottom up, or is it top down?
Well, I mean, I'm always hoping that it's from top up, top down, because I find that this is the fastest way to get anything done. If the leaders are supporting a certain lifestyle, if you are leading a team and you are promoting a culture of busy by being extremely busy and available at all time yourself, and by expecting your team to be busy and available at all time, this is not the workforce and the workplace that we see for the future. This is also, you can see this with the new generation who's coming to work. This is not what they want. They want work. They want a greater flexibility. They want to know that they are being valued for who they are and what they bring to the workforce. And they don't want that mentality that you and I have, being from that generation, that we just had to put the hours because putting in the hours means that you're going to get there. Well, this has to go. This has to go. It needs to change. And if it's come from the bottom, it comes from the top. Maybe it's the best way if it comes from both places at the same time, because maybe we'll get somewhere, right? We'll meet somewhere. But we also have to stop accepting workloads that are unrealistic. And this is something that you, as a leader, you should be aware when you ask too much of your team. And as a team member, you should be able to speak up when something is being put on your plate, when there's no room left on your plate.
Yeah, right.
But is that going to cost you a promotion? This is what the problem is, right? So how are we going to get around
it's
that?
It's almost this like circular discussion, right?
Yeah.
Got to find a way to break it. Yeah, I agree. Daniel, this is a fascinating discussion, and I could talk about this with you for hours. But in lieu of respecting your time, and we're quite a bit into the podcast now, if people want to take some steps forward in something that we talked about today, what's the one piece of advice that you might give them as where to go, where to turn? How do I get going?
Wow. Well, it depends. We talk about a lot of things, but I think that it's all about educate. I love being educated on something that I'm passionate about, although I may not be an expert in. So whatever your best way of educating yourself is, whether it's reading books, watching YouTube's video, listening to podcasts, but be curious about human beings. Be curious about bringing humanity back into your workplace, because it has left. It has left a few years ago, and it is not sustainable. So be caring. If you are asking people to bring their whole self to work, bring your whole self to work as well. Emotions is something that we didn't touch here today, but when I think about bringing my whole self to work, what does it really mean? It means bringing my entire emotions to work. And in a workplace, often what are considered positive emotion, although there's no positive and negative emotion, positive emotions are the ones that are usually rewarded or acceptable in the workplace. Negative emotions are not usually the kind of emotion that you can bring to the workplace and you can talk about it. Anger, for example, fear are not the things you get promoted on, right?
Right.
So I think that it's important that we bring back the caring for human beings and the fact that this is just work at the end of the day. There's a whole life out there. And if we keep on being so dedicated to the time we spend at work to the detriment of the other life that we're supposed to live and the other people who are waiting for us to be with them, it's not something that I look forward in the coming years in terms of the workforce and where we're going with this, right? So I think that really educating yourself and trying to make some small changes along with making a really big strategy about where you want to go into in terms of changing the culture is.
I like that. That's great. Great place to end it, Daniel. Thank you so much. If people want to get a hold of you or learn a little bit more about what you're up to, what's a good place for them to go?
I think on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And you'll probably share my profile.
I will. Yeah, I'll link to it in the profile notes or in the show notes, and also the book, the time off book that you mentioned. I'll link to that in there as well, so people can check that out.
Thank you. So yeah, they can reach me there. I'm often on LinkedIn. It's my way of staying in touch with the industry and learning. So I'm there. So
love it. Great. Daniel, this was amazing. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Adam.
This was my episode with Daniel Poulin. You can find him on LinkedIn. I'll link to his profile in the show notes. You can see the full interview on YouTube. Just search the Proven Principles Podcast. And if you want to learn more about the show, just head over to our website, theprovenprinciplespodcast.com. Finally, if you need help with a business strategy or just someone to talk to about a tough problem in your hotel or restaurant, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by going to knowinghospitality.com/contact. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.
For past episodes, show notes, or if you've got a story that might make a great episode, head on over to theprovenprinciplespodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, even on YouTube. And if you haven't already, don't forget to leave us a rating and a review. Thanks for listening to the Proven Principles Podcast.